He had just closed his eyes to pray when he was spat on by the classmates in the back seat. But that wasn't enough for them. They forced him into a corner, deliberately making him the target of multiple people urinating to vent their anger. Yet, in the face of this unprovoked cruelty from his classmates, he wasn't angry at all. Instead, he chose to endure it silently. This was only because this was South Africa in 1930, and he happened to have British blood. At that time, racial discrimination and drought had intensified to an unprecedented and severe point. 3 weeks after his father was tragically killed under the feet of a bull elephant, little Parker was born with a cry. To forever miss her deceased husband, his mother gave little Parker the same name. Unlike his mother, who loved books and music, what the boy felt most deeply from childhood was the fragrance of the rosewood flowers and the call of the weaver birds. He grew up drinking the milk of a black nanny, and so he formed an inseparable, lifelong friendship with her son, Tom Derry. The two accompanied each other, playing and practicing the piano, experiencing the cultural differences between Britain and South Africa. He thought this comfortable life would continue until he grew up. But one day, a plague suddenly broke out on the quiet farm. Cattle were infected and died one after another. Farm affairs had always been managed by his father, so his mother knew little about disease prevention. The onslaught of the plague caused devastating losses to the farm, and his mother also fell ill from overwork. For his mother to recover in peace, little Parker had to go to a boarding school. As they parted, his mother gave her son a bracelet that was the token of love between her and his father. Although the bracelet wasn't made of diamonds or gold, to little Parker, it felt like the most precious thing in the world. Then, in the reluctant embrace of his mother and nanny, he suppressed the urge to cry and slowly left home. Due to his family's poor financial situation, the boarding school little Parker could attend was the oldest of the 2 white tribes in Africa, founded by the Boers. The Boers are today's Afrikaners, referring to the mixed-race descendants of white immigrants from Germany, France, the Netherlands, and other countries living in South Africa. The Boers were hostile to the local Africans and to the British, with whom they had a history of conflict. Therefore, young Parker, with his British descent, was often subjected to all kinds of hatred and bullying at school. And all the boy could do was endure it in silence. He thought he only needed to endure for a few more days before his mother would recover and bring him home. But what he awaited was not a reunion, but the news of her passing. Watching the small grave bury his hopes, the boy finally realized one thing: he had become an orphan. Since his only other relative, his grandfather, was far away in the Congo, young Parker had no choice but to return to boarding school. Thinking of the classmates who bullied him, he couldn't help but feel a chilling fear. He told his nanny about his experiences, and she quickly found a famous shaman. After a mysterious ceremony, the shaman gave Parker a rooster, saying it was the embodiment of great courage and that the spirits would bless Parker with peace and prosperity. Perhaps the rooster truly possessed some kind of magic. Sure enough, after helping Parker return to boarding school, it did reduce many of the pranks from his classmates at night. However, this life lasted only a month. Soon, World War II broke out. Although the main battlefield was in Europe, it sparked a great upheaval in South Africa. Hitler, the main instigator of the war, vowed to defeat Great Britain and drive all British people out of South Africa. This was a disaster for the British, including young Parker. But for the Boers, who had long harbored this ambition, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So, the older boys who had bullied Parker before started their cruel games again. They slapped the innocent and poor Parker and then smeared his blood on their arms, over the Nazi symbols they had drawn. Not only that, the older boys also set up a private court and killed the rooster that had been guarding Parker. Overwhelmed with anger, Parker fought back, only to be overpowered and hung up by them. If the headmaster hadn't stopped the boys in time, this farce would have taken little Parker's life. After his father's unexpected death and his mother's passing from illness, his nanny took her son back to her hometown. It seemed as though little Parker had been abandoned by the whole world. Fortunately, not long after the boarding school incident, his grandfather returned to South Africa from the Congo, and little Parker was able to move in with him. But the two had no experience living together, so even though he was away from the previous bullying, little Parker's life was still filled with loneliness. He had no peers to play with and frolic with. The only person he could talk to was his grandfather's German friend, Doc. The man was an interesting composer, who loved playing the piano and collecting cacti. Even his donkey was named Beethoven. The grandfather was very happy that his grandson could become friends with his own friend despite their age gap. So, from that day on, Doc became little Parker's teacher. Their classroom was the vast African savanna, and their books were the various animals on the move. Knowledge entered little Parker's mind in different forms. They learned every day from sunrise to sunset, and as their experience and vision grew, the birds of loneliness hovering in their hearts slowly flew away without looking back. But just when little Parker was learning enthusiastically, his life changed again. British officers suddenly entered the cactus garden. They claimed that Doc had not registered as an expatriate and wanted to send him to prison immediately to await trial, until the end of the British war against Germany. Doc, who always believed in peace, did not resist and chose to enter prison to await the test of fate. Fortunately, although the British treated Doc as an enemy, the Boer prison authorities who held him were very polite. The warden admired Doc's cultural atmosphere and gave him special care not only during his remand, but even sent someone to transport his piano and cacti to the prison. One day after little Parker's exam, Doc heard the news that he had passed all his subjects, but he was not very satisfied because, in his opinion, little Parker could do better. But the boy said that good grades at school would lead to jealousy and beatings. So Doc took little Parker to the boxing ring and had the black boxer Pete teach him how to fight. Boxing matches were often held in Bull Prison, not to create a competitive atmosphere, but to exhaust the prisoners' energy so they wouldn't have the strength to cause trouble. So from that day on, 55-year-old Black Pete became little Parker's second teacher. Pete often said that as long as you use your brain and heart well, you can master the secret of winning against a bigger opponent. And this sentence also became his sincere advice to little Parker in his spare time. Spring passed and autumn came. The seasons changed. As he learned more and more, little Parker gradually grew into a teenager. He still kept the habit of growing cacti while learning to play the piano and practicing boxing. Although he never said it to others, he was looking forward to the end of World War II. Because only by first achieving peace could racial discrimination be eliminated. Pete's life in prison was not easy, mainly because of his black blood and skin. Even if Doc deliberately tried to mediate, the prison guard who hated black people would still cause trouble for Pete from time to time. He even used his foot to scoop up feces used for fertilizer and then force Pete to eat it. A person must bow their head when under another's roof, let alone a prisoner held in jail. Pete had no right to resist. He could only bend down and open his mouth. But even in such humility, he was still cursed by the other party.
You can't hide from me forever, cover. Your day will come and it'll be as black.
Parker hated the prison guard's behavior. He wanted to find an opportunity to change this situation. When the warden told Doc that the district chief would be visiting soon, an idea suddenly sparked in his mind. The warden wanted to organize a musical welcome party, and Doc, as a pianist, was naturally the best candidate. So while he composed the music, Parker was tasked with writing the lyrics. He wanted all the prisoners in the jail to express the injustice they faced through song. Although there were some hiccups in the middle, fortunately, after Parker's unremitting efforts, a premeditated concert was finally presented perfectly in front of the district chief. Parker showed his excellent conducting ability, making the conflicting tribal prisoners abandon their divisions for the first time and stand on the same ground. Black people are musicians favored by God. Their singing is like the vast African continent, with a strong, penetrating power and appeal. It is like the ancient wisdom hidden in the depths of the jungle, carrying the primitive power and passion for life of the African people. The concert had been going on for a long time, but Pete was late. It turned out that he had been stopped by the prison guard who had bullied him before. The guard realized that the lyrics sung by the black prisoners were not simple, and he beat Pete hard with a stick, wanting to know their specific meaning. At this time, the concert had reached its climax. Seeing the guard standing with his hands behind him, Parker suddenly realized something was wrong. Sure enough, when he found Pete, he was already lying on the ground, dying. The relationship between the two had long surpassed that of teacher and student. They were more like friends of different ages. When he saw Pete's face covered in blood, Parker knew he was going to lose this friend. He tried his best to persuade him not to leave, but the guard's attack had been fatal. In the end, Pete couldn't hold on. It was 1,948 in a blink of an eye. After the war, Doc returned to Germany, and 18-year-old Parker was alone again. Fortunately, he was accomplished in his studies and appreciated by his teacher, who even applied to Oxford University for him to study abroad. Parker and another classmate were listed as candidates, and his teacher thoughtfully applied for government funding. Boxing championships were often held between schools. Parker, with his experience, naturally became the one students were counting on. Because his favorite female classmate was standing by the court, Parker played better than usual. In the end, he won the match without any suspense. Even while cheering, his eyes were always fixed on the female student. The female student's name was Maria, the daughter of Dr. Daniel Malherbe. If it were anyone else, Parker might still have a chance, but it was Dr. Malherbe. As an intellectual favored by the authorities, Dr. Malherbe hated the English the most. So, for Parker to pursue Maria, the difficulties were daunting to even think about. But Parker's personality was not one to be afraid of difficulties. So, under the cover of darkness, he came to the outside of her school. He climbed over the wall and saw the person he thought about day and night. Although Maria knew her father's temper very well, she still agreed to his request for a date. Simply because she had also fallen in love with Parker. Time quickly came to Saturday morning. Parker plucked up his courage and knocked on the Malherbe's door. Although he had some idea beforehand, when he really met Dr. Malherbe, he couldn't help but be shocked by the other party's attitude. Dr. Malherbe's uncle had died at the hands of the British. So, racial discrimination plus family hatred made him hate the English to a very serious degree. Parker said that he grew up in South Africa and was a South African. But in Dr. Malherbe's view, it was all the same. Because no matter where Parker grew up, what flowed in his body was always English blood. So no matter how Parker tried to reason with him, Dr. Malherbe would not allow him to see his daughter, let alone agree to them dating. After being rejected, Parker and his classmates went to the underground boxing gym. Although this was Boer territory, the owner still secretly ran matches between boxers of various races. In his opinion, as long as you stand in the boxing ring, everyone should enjoy equal treatment. The owner introduced Parker and his classmates to another boss who organized illegal boxing matches. The other man heard that Parker's boxing was very good and wanted to organize a match between Parker and one of his own fighters. Considering that a match between black and white was illegal, Parker was initially unwilling to agree and intended to leave with his classmates. But then he saw the girl, Maria, who had come looking for him. Just as the three of them were about to find a place to relax, the black promoter chased after them, telling the ancient South African myth of the Rainmaker. This shook Parker's resolve. Seeing that Parker was still hesitant, the black boxer who wanted to participate in this competition stood up and challenged him, not believing in the myth of the Rainmaker. Young men can't stand being challenged, especially in front of the girl they like. So Parker decisively agreed to the competition. But his private meeting with Maria still aroused Dr. Malherbe's dissatisfaction. The father's attitude was still the same as before, absolutely not allowing an Englishman to become his son-in-law. So he instructed the police to start investigating Parker and to report anything in a timely manner. And Parker, unaware that he was being watched, was secretly heading to the restricted area to prepare for the fight. What was different from all previous games was that this match was located in an open square. Of course, there was no prize money. Both sides seemed to be fighting just to prove themselves. With the referee's order, Parker and his opponent were soon entangled. Although Parker was knocked down several times because he couldn't find his opponent's weakness, with the experience accumulated in the past, he still won the fight in the end. But the cheers he imagined did not come. Instead, there was endless silence. Until his opponent raised Parker's hand and called him the Rainmaker, the onlookers began to cheer. This night changed Parker's inner thoughts. It also deepened the relationship between him and Maria. Neither of them liked so-called racial discrimination and were eager to see a world where everyone enjoyed equality. So the two hearts that already had a good impression of each other slowly drew closer in their exchanges. However, no matter how careful Parker was, he was still discovered by the police, arranged by Dr. Malherbe, as he left by climbing over the wall. In the days that followed, Parker's figure was often found in the restricted areas where black people lived. He became friends with his competitor, Duma. The two ran and exercised together. One day, while running, Duma suddenly suggested that Parker start a school and teach the people in the restricted area to read and write English. But there were millions of black people in the restricted area. Parker said he couldn't do it. Duma, however, mentioned the myth of the Rainmaker again. This made Parker, who was deeply troubled by it, a little tired. The two immediately argued. Duma's words sparked Parker's thinking. He didn't know what he believed in. At this time, he remembered what Doc had said before. No matter what kind of problem you encounter, you can find the answer in nature. So Parker rowed a boat into the wilderness. When he saw a waterfall cascading down from a great height, still tumbling and flowing to the distance, he suddenly found the answer to his question. If a magnificent waterfall is made up of one drop of water after another, then he could start by teaching a few people first. The principal admired Parker's approach and risked providing a study room. However, since the class time was on weekends, Parker could no longer accompany Maria to dances. The two also had their first argument since they met. Dr. Malherbe had already chosen a son-in-law for Maria. Even at the dinner where the two met, he announced that he was about to enter the cabinet and take office. Hearing that her father was preparing to promote the apartheid plan, Maria, who had long been dissatisfied, finally broke out.
Again, Maria. Now excuse yourself. You will learn there's a price to pay for disobeying me.
If this is the price for seeing an English boy, what's the price for seeing a Jewish one?
I won't tolerate this, Maria. Go to your room.
Or how about a black? What's the price for seeing a father?
While Maria ran out of the house angrily, Parker started his first class at school. It turns out that he was not only an excellent conductor, he was also a natural teacher. Too bad he didn't finish teaching the alphabet before the police found the principal's office. Parker and his classmates were called in for questioning. It turned out one of the policemen was the big boy who had bullied him at boarding school. And just like that, the classes that had barely started were shut down under pressure from the powerful. Luckily, bad news and good news arrived at the same time. That is, Parker and his companions were all admitted to Oxford University. To share this news with his beloved, Parker climbed over the wall into Maria's room that night. He hoped Maria would go to England with him. Who knew she was about to be sent to live with her aunt? So Parker promised that in a month, he would come to pick up Maria after he settled down in England. At the same time, he gave Maria his parents' keepsake as a testimony to their love. Meanwhile, the big boy who had become a policeman started causing trouble for everyone around Parker. Duma was also injured and lost an eye. But it seemed that fate didn't think it was tragic enough and set up all kinds of tests after shuffling the deck again. Because the school no longer provided study rooms, Parker and the others moved the classroom to the church. Maria also sneaked out of the house to help Parker teach black people to read and write English. Unexpectedly, they were still discovered by the police, who were paying close attention to this matter. The two sides were like tinder and explosives, igniting at the slightest touch. Maria broke free and wanted to run to Parker's side, but she saw someone behind him trying to attack. As the police baton swung down with force, Maria also fell to the ground and lost her life. At the funeral, Dr. Malherbe was heartbroken but blamed Parker for the sin. He took a shovel and wanted to trade a life for a life. At this moment, music came from afar. The black people, having learned of the funeral, had come to say goodbye, simply to thank Maria for her contributions. Maria's death hit Parker hard. He had no intention of fighting the forces of racial discrimination anymore. So he found Duma to say goodbye, but found that a school had opened in the restricted area. Hearing that Duma planned to go elsewhere, to also set up English literacy classrooms to impart knowledge, Parker's wavering heart finally made a decision. He didn't want Maria's efforts to be wasted. So between Oxford University and a bright tomorrow, he chose the latter. He thought he had suffered so much and that life would be satisfactory afterwards. Unexpectedly, the police suddenly raided the restricted area that night and were preparing to arrest Parker for violating relevant laws. Bullets mercilessly shot into the bodies of black people, as if their lives were worthless. Seeing the big boy who used to bully him, still unchanged in his nature, continuing to do evil, Parker, who couldn't bear it any longer, finally took action. Finally, with his and Duma's cooperation, he made the other party pay for their actions. When the restricted area finally returned to calm, the thick smoke from the fire had risen into the sky. At the same time, the fire of hope was also ignited in Parker's heart. He and Duma packed their bags and embarked on a journey that would take a lifetime to pave. In fact, whether it was Parker or Duma, they all knew how difficult this was. But they still treated the elimination of racial discrimination as a most ordinary boxing match, because both of them knew clearly that no matter how difficult the road ahead was, they had to take the risk to do it. After all, this was about the survival of their black compatriots. But now Parker was not afraid of anything, because he wanted to grasp the direction in the headwind, to be a petrel in a storm, to be a lonely star running with tears.